At dusk, a man walks beneath a canopy of gold and rust. The air is cool enough to bite, but not cruel enough to drive him home just yet. Leaves tumble around his boots like slow sparks, and somewhere beyond the hedges, a child's laughter carries through the fading light. Someone is carving a pumpkin, the scent of its sweet flesh mingling with wood smoke. A porch light flickers on, and for a moment the whole neighbourhood feels like it's holding its breath. It is October, the season when daylight lingers a little less each day, and the world seems to tilt gently toward darkness. We call it autumn, harvest time, sweater weather. But long before there were porches or candy bowls, this hour of the year meant something deeper. It was the hinge between the living and the dead, the brief turning of the key when one world brushed against the other. The ancients didn't need a calendar to feel it coming. They saw it in the sky, in the slow retreat of the sun, in the fields stripped bare after the harvest. It was the time to gather close, to thank the earth for what it had given, and to acknowledge what it would soon take back. Fires were lit, not only for warmth, but to keep the dark at bay. In those orange flames, people saw both comfort and warning. Life's beauty was brief, and winter would ask its price. Today we call it Halloween, and we mark it with masks, lights, and laughter. We knock on doors, play at being ghosts, and pretend to scare one another. But beneath the playfulness, a much older rhythm still hums quietly. It is the rhythm of gratitude and goodbye, the understanding that every season ends, and every ending deserves remembrance. So when the nights grow long, and the pumpkins glow from every porch, we are keeping an ancient promise. We are remembering the first people who feared the dark but faced it anyway. Halloween, at its heart, has never been about fear. It has always been about light, tiny, flickering human light, pushing back against the endless night. High on the windswept hills of ancient Ireland, the last of the year's harvest lay bundled and bound. The fields, once green and generous, had turned pale under the breath of early frost. Crows drifted above the stubbled earth, their calls sharp against the silence. The work was done, and now came the waiting, the long cold months when the land slept and survival depended on what the summer had left behind. As the sun sank earlier each day, families gathered around their hearths, their breath visible in the cool air. The year was dying, and the Celts knew how to honour such a moment. They called this time Samhain, pronounced Samhain, a night when the old year ended and the new one began, not with a sunrise, but with fire. On the hills, great bonfires blazed like suns reborn. You could see them for miles, a ring of light encircling the dark. The people believed that on this night, the veil between the living and the dead grew thin. Spirits, both kind and troublesome, could wander freely across that invisible border. Some came to bless their descendants, others came to stir mischief, and so the living did what humans have always done when faced with the unknown. They made rules, they made rituals, and they made light. Before the fires were lit, every hearth in every home was deliberately extinguished. For one long, uneasy moment, the villages went dark. Then, from the sacred flames on the hill, the people carried new embers home, each family rekindling its fire from the same source. It was more than warmth. It was renewal, a reminder that they all belonged to the same fragile, flickering world. They also dressed themselves in strange disguises, animal skins, ash-streaked faces, rough masks carved from bark or bone. These were not costumes for amusement. They were shields against the unseen. If the spirits came searching, the living would blend among them, neither friend nor foe, simply another shadow moving through the night. The people feasted, sang, and told stories by the glow of the fire. They set extra places at the table for the dead, not out of fear, but respect. For in their eyes, the departed were not gone, only travelling in another realm, waiting for the warmth of human remembrance to guide them home. The wind off the sea was cold, but the fire's light danced on faces old and young. It was a night of endings and beginnings, of laughter that trembled against the edge of mystery. And in that balance, between fire and frost, life and loss, lay something timeless. Humans have always needed ritual to soften the weight of uncertainty, to remind themselves that even when the dark returns, it will not last forever. The Celts knew this well. Their fires were not just flames on a hill, they were promises made to the coming dawn. When Christianity spread across the old Celtic lands, it did not arrive like a storm. It came quietly, walking beside the customs already rooted in the soil. The church understood what conquerors often forgot, that people will not easily surrender the rhythms that make sense of their world, so rather than stamp out the bonfires of Samhain, it simply blessed them with new names and meanings. November 1st became All Saints' Day, a celebration for every soul the church called holy. The next day, All Souls' Day, was set aside for everyone else, the fathers, mothers, neighbours and children whose goodness had never made it into a book, but whose memory still burned bright at every hearth. Together, the 2 days framed what the people already believed, that the living and the dead still shared one great circle of belonging. As the years turned, old hilltop fires gave way to gentler lights. Across early Christian Europe, villages glowed with candles set in windows and along the paths to churchyards. The sound of bells rolled through the fog, solemn but not sorrowful, one peal for each soul remembered. Families walked together in long candlelight processions, the air sweet with beeswax and wood smoke. Children clutched their parents' hands, wide-eyed at the sight of a world lit softly against the darkness. Inside stone chapels, rows of candles flickered before carved saints. The faithful knelt in silence, whispering names of those they loved and could not see. They prayed for the souls in purgatory, souls believed to be waiting, not lost, only delayed on their way to peace. A mother might pray for her husband, a son for his father, and an old man for the friends of his youth. Each prayer was a small act of hope, a bridge stretched across the unseen. Outside, the children kept their own version of devotion. They wandered from house to house with baskets and small lanterns, asking for soul cakes, round bits of bread marked with a cross. In return, they offered to say prayers for the giver's departed kin. The laughter that followed their songs mingled with the tolling bells, turning grief into something almost cheerful. It was a remarkable blend of worlds, pagan ritual and Christian prayer, fire and faith sharing the same sky. The church had not destroyed the old traditions. It had woven them into its own tapestry, thread by thread, until what was once ancient folklore became sacred calendar. And in that quiet transformation lay a deeper truth. Faith, like language, changes with every generation. Names shift, prayers evolve, and meanings bend, but the human heart does not. The longing to stay connected, to reach across the silence that separates the living from the dead, remains the same. Whether by firelight on a hill, or by candle flame in a chapel, people have always looked into the dark and whispered the same promise: you are not forgotten. In a small village somewhere in medieval England, the last light of October faded behind a veil of mist. The fields lay empty now, their stubble glistening with frost, and the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and wet earth. From the church tower the bell began to toll, a deep, deliberate sound that rolled through the valley, reminding every soul, living or gone, that this was All Hallows' Eve. Inside their cottages, families gathered around low fires. Mothers stirred pots of barley soup while children polished their lanterns, carved turnips, hollowed and flickering with tallow candles. Before night fully settled, they would step out into the chill, cloaks pulled tight, carrying baskets for what they called soul cakes. Each knock on a neighbour's door came with the same soft promise. A prayer for the souls of the departed, offered in exchange for a bite of bread or a coin. It was charity, yes, but also comfort, a way of keeping community alive in a world that often felt uncertain. The villagers did not need to be reminded that life was fragile. A fever could empty a home in a week. A bad harvest could turn laughter into silence by spring. So they faced their fears the only way they knew how, by naming them, sharing them, and lighting small fires against the dark. As the children wandered between cottages, they crossed paths with other visitors. Some imagined, some perhaps not. There were stories of restless spirits, the unbaptized dead, and strange lights that danced over the marshes, the will-o'-wisps, said to be the souls of the lost, leading travellers astray. Cats with dark coats were treated carefully, for it was said they could see what humans could not. Many kept a charm by the door, a rowan twig or a small cross of straw, just in case unseen eyes lingered too long. Fear lived close in the medieval mind, but so did faith. And on this night the two met in fragile harmony. The fear of wandering souls was answered by prayers. The threat of darkness was met with light. For every superstition whispered, there was also an act of kindness, a cake given, a candle lit, a neighbour remembered. When the bell tolled again before midnight, the last of the children returned home, their cheeks pink from the cold, their baskets half empty, their hearts full of stories. The wind rose outside, carrying leaves against the shutters, and the fire snapped as if in approval. For all its talk of ghosts and graves, All Hallows' Eve was not truly about death. It was about connection, the living reaching toward the lost, not with terror, but tenderness. In an age shadowed by plague and poverty, to remember the dead was also to affirm the living, to say, in the simplest way, we are still here and we still care. By the 16th century, autumn in the Scottish Highlands carried a beauty both sharp and uneasy. The air turned thin as glass, the heather faded to brown, and mist crept down from the hills as if the earth itself were exhaling. But on one particular night, the eve of All Hallows, the quiet was broken by laughter echoing through the lanes. They were called guisers, a word that meant those in disguise. Wrapped in ragged cloaks and patched skirts, they roamed the villages of Scotland and Ireland, faces blackened with soot, or hidden behind crude masks carved from bark. In their hands they carried hollowed turnips lit from within, each with a grotesque grin scratched by candlelight. The lanterns swung like tiny fires against the dark, part torch, part joke, part warning to anything wandering unseen. The guisers sang, shouted, and played tricks, demanding treats from doorways in exchange for blessings, or mock curses if refused. It was mischief, yes, but mischief with purpose. To laugh in the face of fear was to rob it of power. If ghosts came searching for company, they would find only chaos and confusion, a crowd of rowdy mortals pretending to be spirits themselves. Some wore antlers, others stuffed straw beneath their coats to look swollen and strange. A few carried bells or bones to rattle in the wind. Children followed close behind, shrieking half in terror, half in delight. The night became a carnival of shadows, where humour met superstition in a dance as old as humanity itself. No one would have called it theatre, yet it was something close. The guisers mocked the things they feared most, the cold, the hunger, the unquiet dead, and in doing so, they tamed them. Around the fire, neighbours traded stories of spirits bested by laughter, of misfortune turned aside by jest. Even the elders, who remembered harder winters, smiled into the glow and let the young make noise. For one night each year the world was turned upside down. The poor demanded gifts from the rich, the fearful became the bold. And through this reversal, people found balance, a way to remind themselves that darkness need not always win. By dawn, the masks would come off, the fires would die down, and the laughter would fade into the ordinary rhythm of life. Yet something lingered in the morning air, a quiet strength, the kind that hides behind humour. For all its play and pretense, Guising was more than mischief. It was defiance, wrapped in laughter and soot. It was the old truth that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it grins through a turnip lantern and walks unafraid into the night. When the first settlers crossed the Atlantic, they carried more than trunks and tools. Hidden in their memories were the old stories, the fires on the hills, the prayers for the dead, the mischief of geysers and ghosts. But the new world they found was stern and watchful. The Puritans who governed early New England had little patience for such papist customs. To them, Halloween was too full of saints, spirits, and superstition. Theirs was a faith that left no room for masks or wandering souls, and yet the old beliefs did not vanish. They simply went quiet for a while. In small corners of the colonies, among Irish and Scottish settlers in the Appalachians, and German farmers in Pennsylvania, those autumn rituals survived in whispers. There were evenings when candles still flickered in hollowed turnips, and when a child might leave an apple on the windowsill for those who travel by night. The celebrations were smaller now, stripped of church bells and Latin prayers, but the feeling remained, the sense that October's end was a thin, trembling border between two worlds. As America grew, so did its traditions. By the 1800s, the harvest had taken on a life of its own. In rural towns, neighbours gathered for husking bees. Long, cheerful nights spent stripping corn by lamplight, swapping stories, and sharing cider sweet enough to make anyone believe in miracles. A red ear of corn meant a stolen kiss, and a gust of wind through the barn rafters might earn a nervous laugh and a ghost story or two. The Irish and Scottish brought their tales of spirits and trickery. The Germans brought pumpkins, larger and easier to carve than turnips. From Native Americans came a deep respect for the harvest itself, the understanding that life and death are bound together in every season. Slowly, all these threads wove themselves into something unmistakably American, a festival that could be solemn and playful in the same breath. On those long autumn nights, when the fields were empty and the sky was full of stars, people gathered in barns warmed by laughter and oil lamps. The fiddles played, the cider flowed, and someone always found a way to tell a story that made everyone glance twice at the shadows. Fear and fun danced side by side just as they had across the sea. The New World did not erase the old fears, it merely planted them in new soil. What once burned on Celtic hills now glowed in American pumpkins. What was once prayer became play. And though the accents had changed, the impulse was the same. To gather close when the nights grew long, to tell stories that kept the dark at a safe distance, and to remember that every flicker of laughter, like every flame, is its own kind of light. Long before glowing pumpkins lined American porches, there was a man in Ireland known as Stingy Jack. Jack was clever in the way that always gets a man in trouble. Too smart for his own good, and just foolish enough to test the devil. One autumn night, legend says, he tricked the devil into climbing a tree, then carved a cross on the trunk so he couldn't come down. Jack enjoyed the victory, but, as most bargains with the devil go, it didn't end well. When Jack finally died, heaven turned him away for his sins, and hell refused him for his trickery. So the devil gave him a single burning coal and sent him to wander the earth forever. Jack placed the ember inside a hollowed turnip to light his path through the dark. From then on, villagers told tales of a ghostly figure roaming the moors on cold October nights, carrying his strange, flickering lamp. They called him Jack of the Lantern, or simply Jack-o'-lantern. When Irish immigrants came to America centuries later, they brought Jack's story with them. But turnips were hard to come by in the New World. What they found instead was a native fruit, round, golden, and generous. The pumpkin, plump and full of possibility, became Jack's new vessel. Its wide surface welcomed the knife, and its hollow heart made room for light. The change was practical at first, born from necessity. But something beautiful happened along the way. The old superstition became art. The grim face meant to ward off spirits turned into a smile, a grin, a laugh. Children took up the carving as a kind of play, scooping out seeds and shaping faces with care. On doorsteps and porches, rows of glowing pumpkins replaced the lonely wandering light of Jack's legend with warmth and welcome. Each carved lantern was still a whisper to the past, a nod to fear, but also a triumph over it. The pumpkin's glow no longer warned of spirits, it invited neighbours. It was still a light against the darkness, but now it flickered with laughter instead of dread. And in that transformation lies one of humanity's oldest talents, turning what once frightened us into something that makes us smile. A superstition became a tradition, a warning became an artwork, and the ghost of Stingy Jack, still wandering in story if not in spirit, might take some comfort knowing that his cursed little lamp became a beacon of autumn joy. Because that is how people survive the dark, by carving beauty into it, one candle at a time. By the late 19th century, Halloween had found new life in the flicker of gas lamps and the rustle of lace curtains. The bonfires of old Europe had become hearth fires now, and instead of gathering on windy hills, families gathered in parlors, warm, well-dressed, and just superstitious enough to enjoy a good chill down the spine. Victorian life prized civility, but it also loved mystery. The same people who built railways and invented telegraphs were writing letters to the afterlife. Across England and America, séances became the height of fashion. Families dimmed the lamps, joined hands around polished tables, and waited for a gentle knock from the beyond. Some knocks were wind, some were imagination, and some, perhaps, were clever knees beneath the table. But no one minded. Belief was half the pleasure. For the less adventurous, there were gentler diversions. Fortune-telling became the parlour's favourite pastime. Apples were floated in bowls of water, and eager young men and women tried to catch them with their teeth. Whoever succeeded first was said to marry soonest. Candles flickered over mirrors as girls gazed, hoping to glimpse the face of a future husband, or, if they were unlucky, a ghostly reminder to stay single a little longer. Halloween, in Victorian hands, became less a night of fear and more a celebration of imagination. Even the spirits were treated politely. They were invited guests now, expected to knock before entering. Newspapers printed charming little poems about harmless haunts and sweet spectres. Greeting cards, lavishly illustrated with owls, pumpkins, and shy witches, were sent through the post, proof that even the afterlife could be sentimental if wrapped in ribbon. Science and superstition waltzed together under the same chandelier. Electricity was beginning to light homes, yet candles still burned beside them for atmosphere. A parlor could hold both a phonograph and a crystal ball, and no one saw the contradiction. It was an age that believed in progress by day and possibility by night. When death lingered so close, through illness, war, or the ordinary fragility of life, the Victorians learned to soften its edge with play. They turned mourning into ritual and fear into ceremony. Halloween became their rehearsal for eternity, gentle, civilized, and tinged with wonder. So while ghosts still drifted through the imagination, they no longer terrified. They were reminders that the veil between worlds might be thin, but it need not be grim. In the glow of lamplight and laughter, the living and the lost shared something precious, a night where curiosity outshone dread, and even death for a moment felt like company. By the dawn of the 20th century, Halloween had crossed its final ocean, the one between fear and fun. In small-town America, the night that once belonged to spirits and superstition was being reclaimed by children with paper masks and sticky fingers. Pranks were still common: tipped over outhouses, soaped windows, and the occasional cow discovered on a school roof. But communities, tired of the chaos, found a gentler solution. They threw parties. In school gymnasiums, church basements, and fire halls, decorations of black cats and smiling pumpkins replaced bonfires. Instead of tricks, there were games, bobbing for apples, costume contests, and the first stirrings of what would become an empire of candy. Homemade popcorn balls and caramel apples gave way to bright, wrapped sweets, easy to share, easy to love, and far less likely to end with a broken fence. Then came Hollywood, always ready to lend a little magic. On screen, witches learned to cackle with charm. Skeletons danced in rhythm. Ghosts stopped haunting and started smiling. Movies and cartoons gave faces to the old fears and made them friendly. By the 1930s, Halloween had become a visual feast. Pointy hats, striped stockings, rubber masks, and candlelit grins that flickered across every doorstep. After World War II, the suburbs blossomed, and Halloween blossomed with them. Rows of new houses, each with its front porch and eager porch light, made the perfect stage. Parents could send their children out with confidence, and those children came back with pillowcases full of sugar and stories. The night became a ritual of safety and joy, costumes worn proudly, laughter spilling down every street, and neighbours greeting neighbours like members of an unspoken club. For a generation that had lived through ration books and war headlines, there was something deeply healing in that. Halloween offered a return to innocence, a small glowing rebellion against the seriousness of the world. Even adults joined in, some carving pumpkins with surgical precision, others dressing up just to hand out candy and remember what it felt like to believe in magic. Television added its own sparkle. Sitcom families bobbed for apples in perfect kitchens, and cartoon specials turned fright into comfort. Pumpkins smiled from store windows, and ghosts sold breakfast cereal. Fear had become nostalgia. The holiday that began in shadow now glowed in technicolor, humming with laughter instead of hymns. Yet the spirit beneath it all remained the same. The costumes changed, the candy multiplied, and the world spun faster. But the impulse was familiar: to gather against the dark, to share warmth, to make the night a little less lonely. Every generation reshaped its fears to fit its hopes, and Halloween, stubborn, joyful, ever-changing, proved that even the oldest shadows can learn to smile.